We've all been there. We're walking in the woods, in a field, along a creek bank, or around our property or around the local park, and we stumble upon an interesting plant. It isn't one that we know, and we immediately begin to wonder, what is that? It's a simple question that holds so much potential, because once we know what the plant is, we can find out more about it. The plants we find growing in a location can also help tell fascinating stories about the history of that area, provide hints as to the types of animals or even other plants that might be found there, and so much more. But it all starts with being able to accurately identify the plant, which is what we'll be talking about in today's episode of Backyard Ecology. Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Their monthly donations help make Backyard Ecology possible. If you would like to join them, please visit my Patreon page. I'll have links in the show notes for the Backyard Ecology Patreon page, blog, YouTube channel, and email list. Today we are joined by my husband, Anthony. Anthony has been on the podcast several times and has become a well-known face to everyone who follows our Backyard Ecology YouTube channel. Hi, Anthony. Welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Nice to be back.
And both of us have gotten multiple questions lately, asking for help identifying different plants. And of course, anytime you're on social media, anytime you're in any of the groups, there's always a ton of questions about what is this? So I thought that today we would just take some time to talk about different ways to identify plants, because really everything starts with knowing what you're looking at, even coming down to, is it native or not, which I think a lot of times we take for granted. We talk about native plants as if everybody knows what a native plant is, but unless you know the plant, how do you know where it's native to?
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's born a plant identification expert. It's not something that you just go out and say, "Hey, I know what all these things are." Everybody has to learn it, and it's a skill that can be learned, I think, by just about anybody. There's definitely ways to go about it that'll allow you to identify things, and it gets you to that point where, yeah, it's native or it's not native. Um, So it's a big question in the native plant world. Is this supposed to be here or not?
Or even just what is it, so that we know for our own curiosity, or so that we know whether it will grow in our area or what uses it or doesn't use it. I mean, everything really comes down to just knowing what it is to start with. That's just basic information. It's like knowing somebody's name.
Yeah, for sure. And plants are the basis for everything. So if you're going to learn to identify something, learning to identify plants is a pretty good one, especially if you're going to do any kind of habitat management, whether that's just planting pollinator gardens in your yard or you're managing 1,000 acres of property. You have to know how to identify plants.
Yes. And it can be really scary to start out with, because there's so many different plants. It's like, how do you even know what to start with? But like you said, none of us were born plant identification experts, and we've all started from no knowledge and have grown to whatever knowledge we have now. And I know I plan to keep growing and learning more plants. I've got a lot more to learn. But yeah, I can usually get it into a pretty good group, but I don't know all my species. Nobody does.
Yeah, and if you're just starting out, if you grab the wrong reference material, something like a dichotomous key that has no pictures and the words all sound like they were written by Harry Potter, you're probably not going to enjoy identifying plants.
No.
And you're not going to be very successful at it either.
Right, exactly. I mean, you and I both have used keys for years now and are pretty comfortable with them. And yeah, they can still be really, really confusing. I mean, the glossary and the back is your best friend when you're using the dichotomous keys. But we'll get to those in a little bit. Let's not start with the hardest thing first. But yeah, let's talk about some of the different ways that are out there to be able to start identifying plants. And I guess in today's world, one of the most common things people go for are apps that you can download on your phone and use to identify it. The idea is you take a picture, sometimes multiple pictures, and then the app will use a combination of the picture, AI learning, and also your location to help figure out and offer suggestions for what that plant can be. And
And
sometimes
sometimes,
I'll let you go ahead and say it. I know what you're going to say. Same thing I was about to say.
and sometimes those suggestions are absolutely ludicrous. Um, if you know anything about plants, that is, you'll look at it and go, "This is ludicrous. There is no way this is what this is." Um, and I guess that's my big hang up with apps is sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're so far off. It's just amazing that they're that far off. But they're okay in certain situations, I guess.
Yeah, they can be really good when they work, but if you don't know what you're looking at and you're just starting out, how do you know when they're not working? I mean, you can't know that it's wrong if you don't know anything about the plant to begin with. The reason why we can laugh at them and say some of them are ludicrous is because we have enough of a background and knowledge now to know when it's wrong. Sometimes, I mean, there's still times when we're like, well, we just don't know enough about it. And it might get you to the right family. And then it's like, okay, yeah, I guess maybe. And you have to go and do a little bit more digging, learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I get about, I would say, 5 to 10 emails or text a week of a plant somebody has ID'd with an app, and they've looked at the picture in the app, and they've looked at what it says it's supposed to be, and they're not plant nerds by any stretch, but they know enough to know that that's probably not right, so they end up sending it to me. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's not what that is. It's this thing that's supposed to live here and not something that is in a family that lives in South America, you know.
Yeah. And I probably get about an equal amount, sometimes more, sometimes less. And I mean, I'm really happy that the people are recognizing that, yeah, this doesn't quite look right. And I think that's a big first step is to be able to say, yeah, I don't quite, this doesn't seem right for me. I don't know why it's not right, but it just doesn't seem right. And I mean, knowing that's a pretty good step in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean the apps run on AI. So the accuracy of the app depends on how much information has been put into that artificial intelligence system, how much it's had to compare. So if it's a really common plant, yeah, sure, it's probably going to knock it out of the park pretty quickly. It's seen a lot of it, it's learned. But if it's something that's fairly rare, it may have not seen it but once or twice, and it might confuse it with something that's similar. And also the strength of the app depends on the strength of the AI that it's been programmed with. They do vary. It's like anything else that's software based. There's different levels of how well it's going to work. It's just the way they are.
Yeah. Plus, there's the fact that it's the picture that you take as well and how clear it is. And does it show the exact characteristics that you really need to be able to distinguish this from that? I mean, that's going to play a big role in it too.
Yeah, and that goes for apps, and yeah, you get on like iNaturalist and you'll see some pictures on there, and there's no way you could identify the plant from them. They're out of focus, or they're in such bad light you can't tell anything. If you're going to identify plants, you need clear pictures, and you need clear pictures of not just one shot of the whole plant. That's helpful, but I mean, you need pictures of the leaf, top and bottom. You need pictures of the stem. You need pictures of the flowers. If you've got them, you need pictures of the seeds or fruits. Um, basic growth form. I mean, that all those are things that go into identifying a plant. And on some of them, you need all of them to identify the plant because there's so many things in that genus that look similar that you need that many traits to figure out what it is you're looking at.
And I guess that's another thing is that it depends on how far you want to identify it too. You don't always have to get it to species. I mean, there's lots of times when I look at something and I go, yep, that's in this genus. I mean, take the goldenrods. You and I both do it. We don't, 99% of the time, we're not identifying goldenrods down to species. We're going, yep, it's a goldenrod and moving on. Now, if we really want to know because it looks different or it's growing in a different location or we have a reason, then we can go deeper. But most of the time, we both, yep, it's a goldenrod. And there's so many other different plants that we go and do that with as well.
Yeah, I mean, something like a goldenrod, if if it can get broken down to it's a clump former, it's a rhizome spreader, yeah, I'm good with that because I'm usually dealing with them on a field type basis. In a garden, you definitely want to know what your goldenrod is because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you're going to have problems. If you put the wrong one in there, you're going to have a garden of goldenrod. That's going to be about it. But yeah, um, yeah. When they teach you in plant systematics, I mean, they teach you to get it to family. I mean, that's basically all they really are worried about. Because once you get it to family, the rest is easy,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking. But if you can break it down that far very quickly, the rest is not bad.
But one of the things that makes apps really, really, really nice is that you've got infinite almost amounts of information at your fingertips at all times for the weight of your phone that you're probably carrying around anyway. With you and I, we started with field guides a lot of times. And we'll talk more about dichotomous keys in a bit, but we were carrying around books. And you can only fit so many books in a backpack, and you only want to carry so many books in your backpack. I mean, it just gets to be too much weight there. So having that world of knowledge at your fingertips is so nice when the apps work.
Yeah, yeah, and if you understand, you're going to burn a lot of data if you're doing it properly because you're going to be taking a lot of pictures. You're probably going to be checking other sources. So, if you have a limited data plan, you can burn it up pretty quickly. Getting into plant nerdom, it can go fast. Or if you're in an area where you don't have good cell service, you're going to be in trouble if you're relying on an app 100%. I mean, that's where you're probably going to have to take a bunch of pictures on your phone and going back and figuring out what it is. That's the nice thing about a phone, though. In the good old days, we carried plant presses with us in the field, and when we found stuff we didn't know what it was, we pulled it up and pressed it. Everything from the top to the roots went in the plant press. You'd smash it flat, and then you'd take it back and spend hours looking at it under a microscope. Um, and we still do that to some extent. I mean, there's some things you just really have to get to that level with, but most people are not going to have to go there.
Yeah, that's more of usually for scientific purposes and research restoration purposes, things like that. For normal everyday stuff, no, you really don't have to do that.
Yeah, that's like when you're collecting herbarium specimens and stuff. For an actual record, like what pops up if people are familiar with Bone App, they have those little maps where it has the counties recorded. Those are usually from a herbarium specimen that was entered into a college herbarium and is an actual scientific record that that species occurred there. So
Right. And for those that may not be familiar, herbariums are basically plant museums. There are
yeah, they're
lots of
dried,
dried.
dried and sorry about that, dried and pressed plants mounted on sheets. with detailed location data, dates, and all that good stuff. They're really awesome. If you're a plant nerd, you can spend hours in a herbarium just tracking down where things were found and trying to figure out, if they're in your area or not.
And those records can be extremely important for all kinds of knowledge and research and scientific learning for decades, hundreds of years later, because I mean, we do still have herbarium specimens from from 100+ years ago, and are still learning from them because they do help to tell us, hey, yeah, this was found here back then. And you can go back and you can look and see, is it still in that same location or anywhere near there? And really start to learn and figure out things. And there's been some surprising findings from herbarium specimens.
Yeah, they're starting to digitize a lot of the herbarium specimens now. You can actually get into them online and spend hours looking through them, going, "Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that was found near here." It's a big rabbit hole to go down. If you're into plants, it you can literally get lost in them.
Yeah. So obviously, you and I mean, I think everybody's probably guessed this by now. We don't use the apps very much. It's just not what we started out with. It's not what we're used to using. I see the pros in them, especially the not having to carry around pounds and pounds and pounds of field guides. Um, I've gotten so I take pictures and go back home to my field guides is kind of the way I do it because that's what I'm used to. But for people who are starting out, if you want to try an app, give it a shot. I do suggest after the app says this could be it, look it up, do some research, and figure out whether that's really a possibility. Don't just take it that that's what it is. You're still going to have to do some double checking on that. But unfortunately, Anthony and I are not the ones that are going to be able to say, "Oh yeah, this is the best app that we really like." Because for me, the best app that I like is my field guides. I still go back to the books. I'm old school that way.
Yeah, I rely heavily on books. I mean, I'll use the internet. I'll look up pictures and stuff, but um, I use a lot of keys, and there's no pictures in those. But I was kind of trained that way, so that's just what I'm used to. But it all comes down to what you're comfortable using too. Um, I'm just more comfortable with a book,
Mhm.
but I also have a pretty good handle on plant families by flower, so I could usually break it down to a family in a lot of genera too. I can get it to genus pretty quickly on a lot of them. So, getting it to species after that's fairly easy. You've knocked out 90%, 99% of the plant world very quickly, unless you've got it to Asteraceae or something, and or grasses, which are a whole different ball game. But it comes down to what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm right there with you. But then we've both had slightly different background trainings than a lot of people. And so, yeah, pick what you're comfortable with. But so the next thing that we probably should talk about and way to identify plants is using field guides, which field guides, that's what I love. I'll go to the field guides first. Field guides, or now I will sometimes, if I know I'm pretty close to it, will go on a Google search and look at images. I will do that some more now. I've gotten lazy that way, but field guides are nice. And they're really good from the standpoint of if you're in a certain location and you're looking for relatively common things, because field guides don't have everything. They just have the common plants, the ones that you're more likely to see, the bright, showy, flashy things that you're more likely to notice. And they tend to be pretty, well, the best ones, in my opinion, tend to be pretty regionally specific because then you can, again, knock out everything. I mean, like here in Kentucky, I don't need to know what's up in Maine only or what's only found down in Florida. I can go ahead and just knock those out because they're not going to be here. But a plant field guide that is more focused on Kentucky or Kentucky and Tennessee, those more regional ones are going to be much more helpful for where I'm at. Somebody in Maine doesn't need to know the plants that are only in Florida. I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah, it helps if you can get a field guide that really necks it down to where you're at. And one nice thing is, if you're near a large chunk of public land like a national park, almost guarantee it there's going to be a plants of blah 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 national park or plants of such and such national forest. And those are nice. They're going to give you the flashy common plants, the ones you're most likely to see. The average person's not going to be down on their hands and knees looking at a liverwort or something that's just odd and bizarre, because they might not even notice it. I mean, unless you're really looking for some of this stuff, especially when you get into some of the weird orchid species, and they just don't look like anything when you're out in the woods unless you really know what you're looking for. And some of those are going to be in those books. They're not going to have a lot of your grasses in those books because grasses are not flashy or showy unless it's something like a plume grass, and then it might be in that book.
Grasses are just also hard to identify by pictures because field guides really rely on pictures and showing you pretty picture and then having you be able to go, oh, yes, pretty picture matches real life. That's probably what it is. But again, I mean, in some ways, that has the same problem as the apps because you only have the flashy stuff and you don't have the less common stuff. So if you happen to stumble upon something that is less common, you may say, oh, it has to be this more common species because that's what's in the book, and never even realize that you've got something really interesting and different there because you went with the pictures and the pictures don't have everything. But I mean, I'll be honest, it's the pictures that draw me to the field guides first because I am a very visual person. So I do like to be able to go, oh, pretty picture, real life, and match them up that way.
Yeah, and the field guides don't have the variations usually. Plants have a lot of variability. They just do. I mean, I can go out on our farm right now. Tall ironweed is blooming. I guarantee you I can find some with white flowers all the way to the darkest purple, almost indigo blue, and everything in between. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're just flipping through looking at pictures and you're like, well, this is looks like that, but it's white, it's not purple, or it's light pink, it's not purple, and you're just kind of trying to match the pictures and the book doesn't talk about the variation in flower color, you're going to miss the ID. But
Mm-hmm.
it happens. Are the vast majority of them purple? Absolutely. Yeah, they are. But I mean, our farm's not even huge. I can go out there and I can find white to almost indigo blue on ironweed. Right, maybe out the back door. I know there's a white one out there right now. I can see it. Um, you know, it's just the way it is. Plants vary a lot.
Yes, exactly. That white one's been, I was going to say, I can walk out the door and find them all because that white one's been there for how many years now? Um, yeah, it's always been there. But yeah, and the thing about the field guides too, if you're just relying on the pictures and not reading the descriptions, is that you lose a lot of the subtleties. I mean, there are plants that I identify, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but I identify by feel as far as which species they are. I can tell you this species from that species by the way they feel, and you lose that, or the smell. So you still have to read the descriptions with them as well. You can't go just by pretty pictures with the field guides, but they're a nice start. If you don't want to go with the apps and you want to have something that does have those pictures as a basis.
Yeah, I'm kind of weird in this respect. Is I'm okay with a field guide that just has line drawings in it without pretty pictures, that just shows me the shape and what the form of the plant's supposed to look like and what the flower's supposed to look like, and then gives me a good description. because it takes all that variability out of the equation. Because when you have a color picture, the thing people tend to do is they tend to think that's what it is supposed to look like. And yeah, that's what that particular plant they took a picture of is supposed to look like. And after they color corrected it and everything else, it might not even look like what it looked like when they took the picture of it. I make video, it does not look the same on every device. And it kind of shocks me how variable it is. And then I start wondering, I wonder how all these pictures in these books, I wonder how close they are to what the actual plant looked like.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm mixed. If I'm looking at herbaceous forbs, what we all call flowers, I like pretty pictures. If I'm looking at trees and working with a tree field guide, I don't want pretty pictures. I'm like you, I want the line drawings. That just, it makes more sense to me because trees are so variable and they don't have pretty flowers anyway, for the most part. Um, yeah, there's some that really do, but I can go find pretty pictures of those if I want them. For just a basic tree identification book, I want line drawings. So I kind of go both ways. But then again, when you and I were in college and we were taking dendrology and some of these other classes, a lot of the guides that we had there, if they had pictures at all, had line drawings. So I guess it is kind of what you get used to and what you're comfortable with.
Oh yeah, the standard for winter identification is still Coronamens with line drawings of twigs and buds. I mean, it's a basic book. It was written like 100 years ago or something crazy like that. I mean, the book's a lot older than I thought it was. I looked it up the other day and I was like, wow, that book's been around that long. It's still the standard. I mean, it's what foresters use. It's a good resource. But I agree. Things like trees, shrubs, grasses, especially ferns. There's just certain plants that just do a lot better being served by a line drawing book. Um, Identifying ferns is kind of tough. It all comes down to very small reproductive structures on the leaves for the most part. When you get into the nitty gritty of identifying ferns, line drawings are a lot better at helping you sort them out.
Yes, exactly.
And grasses all comes down to ligules and things like that. A drawing of it is far better than a picture. And a lot of times you're identifying grass after it's dead and dried out anyway. So
Yeah. Grasses, trees, ferns. Yeah. Those are definitely where I prefer the line drawings. So we've mentioned keys a few times, and we should talk about keys. They're not where you want to start with learning how to identify plants in your plant identification journey, because dichotomous keys, they sound simple, and in concept they are, because basically it's just two choices, really, is what it comes down to. It's a list of choices, and it's, does it have this and this and this? If so, go to this number. Or does it have these other characteristics? If so, go to this other number. And you just keep going. And I know when I was young, we had what was called choose your own adventure books. And you would read a little short story, be like one page, and then you'd have a choice to make. And you'd go, depending on your choice, you'd flip to another page and you'd continue the story, and you got to choose your own adventure through the story. And that's really what a dichotomous key is, but for identifying whatever, in this case, plants. And they can be amazingly detailed and amazingly in depth and get you exactly to the species. But they also tend to be very technical and use a lot of technical terms and jargon, which, like I said at the very beginning, very quickly the glossary becomes your best friend and you're looking up pretty much every other word, unless you are a botanist and a plant identification expert.
or speak Latin.
But even then, not all of the jargon is Latin based. So most of it
Uh,
is.
Enough of it.
Yes, but you're still making some choices and some guesses sometimes on there. So yeah, it can get very, very overwhelming very quickly.
Yeah, I would not recommend anybody jump right in and go pull up, the free version of Flora of the Southeast by Wheatley and attempt to identify plants in their backyard with it because it's 1,000 pages of things that sound like they were written for Harry Potter, quite honestly. The plant descriptions are good, you'll understand those, but trying to decipher what plant you have is all dichotomous keys. There are very few drawings. There's a few where needed that are just line drawings that will show us particular trait or something, but it'd be very confusing. It's an awesome book, believe me. I use it almost daily looking things up, but dichotomous keys take some getting used to, and you almost have to start with things you know what they are, work them through the key and see if you get to what you know that they are, and just keep doing it over and over again. And honestly, the best way to understand a dichotomous key is to have to write one, which when I was trained in systematics, we had to write keys, and it makes you think like the key is supposed to be used. So um, super handy tool if you're a botanist or any other kind of biological taxonomist. Most people are probably never going to step into the range of the dichotomous key.
And for me, my favorite way to use keys, because I use them too quite a bit. And yeah, weeklies is awesome. His dichotomous key is. My favorite way to use them is when I already know what the genus is. When I already know pretty much what it is, and I'm just trying to get it down to the species. Because at that point, I've cut out 99% of the information of what it could be. I'm not starting from scratch. And that makes it so much easier because you might be working with 2, 3 dozen species versus working with literally thousands of possibilities and options. And even then, once I get what I think it is with the key, I'm going to go back and look at pictures and see, does it really match? Is this really what I think it is? Because the jargon is so crazy sometimes. And in college, we'd go back to or at least I would go back to the herbarium specimens and look it up to see, yes, does this really match what I keyed it out to? Let me look at some things that I know that is that species. And there were times when, yeah, it didn't match. And sometimes I was way off and it would be like, okay, great. Now I got to start back over again. But then again, at that time, a lot of times I couldn't even get it. I was getting down to family at best, just by pure knowledge. So I had more options and more chances to mess up.
Yeah, and sometimes when you get it to family, I mean, you still have a long way to go. Like you might
Yes.
know, hey, it's an aster. Oh, great. That's, 35% or something like that of flowering plants. You still have a lot of genera in there to weed through. So you'll just have a dichotomous key that just gets you to a genus in the Asteraceae or a subfamily of the Asteraceae, or then you have to go to another key to get to the genera. So, sometimes it isn't as huge a leap when you get it to a family. But if you get something, oh, I don't know, even if you get it to the mints and the Lamiaceae family, it's a lot smaller. It's going to get you to a genus pretty quickly within that. There's not as much to go through. Um, yeah, the smaller the family, the faster your keying is going to get you to a genus, and that's the big thing. A lot of times, if you can get it to a genus, that you'll if it's a big one, there's going to be a whole book on it, I mean, there's a book for the Solidagos of North America. If you really love goldenrod, you can go buy this book. Don't expect it to have beautiful, pretty pictures. It's got a few, but I mean, the rest of it's keys for just banging through and figuring out which Solidago you have. It's a lot of microscope work. They figure most of this stuff out by flower parts. Some of those flowers are tiny. So um, if you don't have the flowers on a plant, it can make identifying it tough. You can usually get it close to a genus, but some of them, the plants are so similar until you start looking at the flower structures.
Yes.
And that's what most keys are based on at the species level. You are getting down to you have to have the flower in order to identify it using most dichotomous keys written for plant systematics.
And I mean, we've kind of been talking about this throughout, but to some extent, knowing what you're looking for and just knowing the plant is really where we're trying to get. I mean, you don't want to have to look up the same plant every single time. We all start with having to learn them. But once you start to learn them, then you can just go, oh yeah, that's that's common milkweed, or that's butterfly milkweed, or that's tall goldenrod, or tall ironweed. I mean, there's something you can just get to. And so that's always really helpful when we can do that. But to do that, you've got to start learning what to look for really with it as you start to identify it. And like we've both said, flowers are really, really helpful within the flowering species of plants, the angiosperms. And often the flowers, once you start to learn the patterns with them, you'll be able to get it to genus or family just by looking at the flowers, even if you can't get it to species from that. I mean, all milkweed flowers have the same basic structure. So I don't care where I am. If it's in the milkweed family, I can look at it and go, yeah, that's a milkweed. May not be able to tell you a single other thing about it, but I can tell you it's a milkweed. And then I can go from there and look up either pictures of milkweeds in the area. I can go to field guides. I can go to the keys for the area at that point and figure out which species it is. Same thing with the mints, same thing with so many other different groups of plants.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost all based on flower structure as to how plants are grouped into families and genera. And things don't have to look similar within that, aside from the flower structure. I mean, you can have things that are super, super divergent. So, I mean, you can have trees, vines, and herbaceous plants, and they're all in the same family. And, people probably don't think about that. And it doesn't happen often, but there are some families that really stretch it out.
Rosaceae, the rose family.
Yeah, rosaceae all over. I mean, most of your fruit trees are in the rose family. And then you have roses, and then there's a lot of herbaceous plants. So Cannabaceae that way. So that would be the family of hemp, marijuana. So you have, obviously, that would be a herbaceous plant. Hops are in the same family, which is a vine, and then hackberries, which are a tree, which doesn't look anything like the other two. So, but the flower structures all look the same when you get down to it, and you look at the flowers, they look very similar. And I'm talking like on a get out the hand lens and look at the little tiny structures in the flower.
So, yeah, I mean, when you're trying to identify just by your knowledge, some of the things you can look for are first, if you've got the flowers, flowers are amazing to look at because they do start to tell you a whole lot. Also, looking at what that basic growth form is. Is it a vine? Is it a tree or shrub or a forb? Those, what we were talking about, the herbaceous forbs, the flowers. Is it a grass? that will help to put it into at least categories. I mean, like we were talking about, some families you can have quite a few of those in there, but you can still at least knock out a lot of things, especially if you're trying to get it down to species, then even within the rose family. Yes, you can have vines and trees and forbs as well within the rose family, but then knowing which one of those you're looking at knocks out a whole bunch of the other ones. Um, Looking at the leaves is also really important. How do they come off of the plant? Are they opposite or alternate? And are they simple or compound? And those are things that are technical terms, but they're also easily learned. Simple Google search is the way to do it, because trying to explain that on a podcast, not the easiest thing in the world to do. You can do it, but
Yeah.
if you're like me and more visual, it's a little bit harder to visualize in just words.
Yeah, you can knock a lot of plants off a list just by knowing whether the leaves are opposite, alternate, or whorled. I mean, if they're whorled, there's not a whole lot of things that fall into that category compared to alternate or opposite, and especially in tree work.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
tree
that
world,
you
that
knock out huge chunks of the tree realm just knowing if it's opposite, alternate, or whorled. Bang. You get rid of a lot of stuff. It's
yeah.
just like, if you look at a plant and go, well, it looks like a grass. Well, you've got it down to a grass, a sedge, or a rush, for the most part. It could be some weird lily, but for the most part, it's going to be one of those three. And then there's other little simple things you can go check it for that'll knock out the other two. Then if it's still a grass or a sedge, you're going to have your work cut out for you. But, you know, it doesn't take a lot of characters usually to start knocking out huge chunks of the plant world.
Right. And in identification, I think that's as much it as anything else. We always focus on finding out what it is, but a huge part of it is finding out what it isn't and knocking out those chunks that you don't have to think about anymore.
Yeah, it's that way in all of biology. I mean, if you're an entomologist, you're dealing with a ridiculous number of species also. So, when you can knock out 99% of them, it really helps. And it's the same way with plants. If I can knock out 99% of them, well, I can deal with getting it down to a genus or even a species at that point. But if I'm worried about, which one of the infinite number basically of plants is this, I have to know it's going to be rough going. And sometimes you get it down to a genus and that's it. You can't get it any farther because it might have hybridized with something else in that genus and it doesn't match anything. It's just the way it goes. Um, Plants don't always play by the rules. So
Yeah, it would make life so much easier if the plants read the books and played by the rules.
yeah, they don't always grow where they're supposed to. They don't always look like they're supposed to. And then you start looking at the flowers and you're like, well, it's definitely this thing, but it's 4 times bigger than what it should be. Maybe it had a mutation, maybe it just really liked where it was growing. Maybe, a farmer was washing his fertilizer tank out in that spot and it just got super powered. You never know, but
And sometimes it's a species that hasn't been described yet. So it's not in the books because everybody thought it was some weird variety of another species. I mean, like what you were saying, they were writing it off as being one of these weirdnesses when it wasn't really weird so much as just its own little thing that nobody's really recognized yet.
and that happens way more often than you would think. I see new things getting named basically weekly. I mean, it's not an uncommon occurrence, and plant taxonomy changes frequently. It They just redid the asters, so everything's got a new name now. Especially, at least in the new world, everything's basically got a new name now. So things change. Um, if you're not out there playing with plants and doing this kind of stuff all the time, you'll open a book one day, a newer book, and you'll be like, what just happened here? None of this is the same. It's still the same. It's just that they found something new out and they reclassified things. So it happens.
Hmm.
New stuff's found all the time
Yeah.
in really weird places.
Yeah, exactly, which is so cool. And I mean, we've been really focusing on what you can see, and that's extremely helpful. But that's not the only sense that you can use when it comes to identifying plants. I know I've always walked through the woods and kind of touched things, and I never realized how much I touched things and relied on my sense of touch until I was working with some interns one time. And they actually commented about, but I learn a lot about the plants that way because there's so many different textures with leaves. Some of them are really rough, some of them are smooth, some of them are wrinkly or thick or thin or leathery. And it just really helps me, at least, to be able to identify it. And I remember I was on a job interview one time and we had gone out and hiked out in the field and stuff together and talked about different plants there. And they had seen me as I was identifying the plants in the field or asking about new plants that I was encountering for the first time. They saw me touching the plants and stuff. And then we came back and we were having a conversation. And part of the job interview was they were showing me pictures of different plants and asking me to identify them. And they were laughing because they could tell just from being with me earlier in the day out in the field, I was wanting to touch the plants to be able to identify them. And I even made comment on one of them because they were laughing because they could see it so badly in my eyes. I was like, I know the plant, but I have to be able to touch it to be able to tell you what it is. And you can't do that with a picture. And luckily, it was a very laid back interview and they loved the fact that I was doing it. But yeah, to me, being able to touch it tells me so much. Now, if you're going to be touching the plants, I highly recommend you learn a few first without having to touch them, like poison ivy, poison hemlock. It's really helpful to learn stinging nettles, or at least have a good search image for what stinging nettles look like. False nettles look very similar, but once you know what stinging nettles look like, you'll take a stick and kind of peek first underneath leaves to make sure it's false nettles instead of stinging nettles. So you have to learn a few before you can do the touching everything. And then you want to be careful because, well, there's some stinging caterpillars that you don't want to touch that like to hang out on the underside of leaves. Luckily, I haven't ever found them that way, but it's always a possibility when you walk through the woods touching all the leaves around you.
Yeah, feeling the plants is always good because there are definitely lots of the keys. Even we'll have in there, various phrases that refer to how hairy or fuzzy plants are. And while you can see it, sometimes it's better to feel it. Some plants have smells to them.
Mm-hmm.
You crush up the leaves and you can smell it. Sassafras, spice bush, tree of heaven, walnut.
Paw. Yeah, I've got people that run for me now if I grab a leaf and start crunching it up because I've shoved so many stinky leaves under their noses. But they know the plants now. They know which ones to run from.
Taste can tell you some things about plants. Again, unless you're a good identifier of plants, I don't recommend putting them in your
Mm-mm.
mouth because some of them just taste really gross and they're just gross. Some of them taste really gross because they're incredibly toxic. So you don't really want to put a big wad of a poison hemlock leaf in your mouth. You are going to regret it. It's not a good thing to do. If you've watched any of the YouTube videos I do, you will know that I like to put plants in my mouth. So, but I know they're not going to hurt me. The ones I'm generally doing that with, but I mean, some of the field guides will even have that in there. You know, they taste incredibly bitter. They taste sweet. They taste like root beer, whatever. You know, they'll have that as an identifying characteristic. And the reason they usually put that in there is because it's going to be the one thing that defines it over something else. So I'm going to tell you, none of them really taste phenomenally great. You're going to end up spitting it out. Um, most of them are pretty rough. There's a few. I mean, obviously, people eat wild plants. There's like a whole thing around that. Some of them taste okay, but the vast majority of them either have no taste whatsoever or they're gross. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
And for most things, it really does come down to a combination of identification methods. I'll get it so far from knowledge, and then I'll take it to the next level with something else, looking at a key or a field guide or going to the internet or whatever to really fine tune my knowledge even more.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are just really easy to identify. Like, you know, our old dendrology professor used to call them the 60-mile-an-hour trees. Things like American sycamore, you can drive down the road and identify it, you know, as you go flying by at 60 miles an hour. This time of year, black gum would fall into that category because it's the only big tree in the woods that's got red leaves on it. Um, and I mean, there's very few herbaceous plants you're going to do that with. I mean, you might be able to do common milkweed and butterfly weed, but when you go zooming by a whole field of goldenrods, it's like, yep, solidago. There you go. You got it to a genus. Um, and I can make a really good educated guess as to, you know, three or four species that is going to be, but without getting out there and actually looking at it up close, not going to be able to get it any farther than that.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's also, I think, important to know that nobody's going to know every plant out there. We're all still learning with them. And there's still plants that throw both of us for a loop. I mean, there's certain types of plants that you're much stronger with than I am in just basic knowledge. There's other plants that I'm stronger than you are just in looking at and saying, yep, that's what that one is. There's some that we both go to each other to double check on. And there's others that we both look at and go, yep, it's a plant. Or, like you said, getting it down to family. And that's as far as either one of us can go without really digging deeper.
Yeah, I'm definitely a tree shrub guy.
Yes.
And in the forb realm, if it's something that is wildlife management leaning, as in, you know, it can be used for quail or turkeys, deer, or whatever. I tend to be a little stronger in those, you know, because I spend a lot of time looking at them. Um, but definitely trees. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
but I've been looking at trees since high school, so you know, I have a little bit of experience at it.
Yeah. You are definitely stronger than I am with trees, especially trees without leaves. Um, I can do it, but you're much stronger than I am there. And I'd say for what most people would consider the pretty flowers, I'm stronger than you are on those. But yeah, it comes down to what you like. And I like what the pollinators are using. I like what the birds are using for seeds and stuff like that. So those are what I've learned to identify more of.
Yeah, and before anybody asks, identifying trees without leaves is very important because when you're doing habitat management type stuff, you are usually going to be doing it in the winter time because there are no bugs and it's cool outside. So if I need to go cut down a patch of trees because we're opening it back up or trying to reduce canopy, I want to know what it is I'm cutting down because there's certain things like around here, sweet gums, they grow like weeds. I am going to cut those down. I may not want to cut down the chinkapin oaks or the cherry bark oaks that are coming up in that area. I may want to not cut down too many tulip poplars, let's say, because I want to leave a few for the bees. Um, it's important to be able to identify that stuff without the leaves on it. And with trees, it's not terribly hard, quite honestly, once you get used to looking at the bark. And there's a few you might need a twig with a bud on it, but you can get really good at identifying trees.
Oh, yeah.
But you got to look at a lot of them, like tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. I used to do habitat surveying. I've looked at a lot of trees. So
Yeah, but you don't have to look at that many to get good. You get a whole lot better if you look at a lot of trees, but you can start to get pretty good at it with a lot fewer trees.
yeah, and when you're doing, if you're wanting to learn about habitat on your place, I mean, you just go out. If you can learn the three most common forbs, the three most common shrubs, and the three most common trees on your place, and get to where you can just go out and identify those, and then go to the next three in each category and learn to identify those. And before you know it, you're going to know a lot of plants, but you don't need to learn it all at once. I mean, if you know the top three, you probably know 90% of what's growing out there, quite honestly. And then there'll be a few other species that are interspersed here and there. But, in a lot of areas, you learn the top three, you've learned a good amount of what's growing in that area.
Yeah. And I think that's really the important point here is don't feel bad if you can't identify everything. Start learning a little bit. And then once you've got a good handle on those, learn a few more and a few more. And just keep building on your knowledge and looking for those patterns. And one day you'll just be like, oh, yeah, that's in this family. Don't know which one it is, but it's in this family or it's in this genus. And you'll just feel completely comfortable and be able to identify so much more and just know what it is, which is always fun.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. And I mean, we go in the woods. There's still stuff out there that I don't know what it is.
Mhm.
I'll look at it and I'll have an idea what it might be, but or I might be able to go, it looks sort of like this other thing. I know what it is, so it's probably related to it. But I mean, there's lots of plants in North America. So
Mhm.
your chance of ever knowing them all is about zero,
Yeah, pretty much.
you know.
And I would say, even on our farm, every time I go out and actually really look and pay attention to the plants around me, I probably discover something else that I don't know down to species just by looking at it. Something else will catch my eye, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I may know part of what it is, but I don't know it down to species. And so I'm still learning. And like you said, our farm's not that big, it's about 40 acres. And I'm still, after having done this for so many years, and we've lived here for quite a while now, learning new species of plants from the farm.
Yeah, and I've noticed every time I disturb an area or I go and spray it to get ready to plant something, that what comes back is always something different that I haven't seen before. And it's like, wow, that darn fescue was suppressing all this cool stuff. So yeah, it's amazing what's there that isn't growing sometimes, and then boom, there it is. I walked out there one day and found senna growing. I've never seen senna on this farm before, and there it was, big, beautiful senna plant. You know,
Mhm.
where'd it come from? I don't see it growing anywhere around here. It's not like it's on the neighboring farm because it's wall to wall fescue. But that place actually got cleared off by the ducks back when we had them, and all kinds of weird stuff came up after they eradicated the grass, which unfortunately is coming back because it's hard to get rid of.
Well, we've been talking for about an hour now, and I know we could keep going. There's just so much that we could talk about when it comes to learning how to identify plants. But I'm thinking we should probably wrap this up. And even though we've only just barely scratched the surface of how to identify plants, I hope this conversation has been helpful to our listeners. And for those who want to hear more, I touch on how to identify certain species in the Backyard Ecology blog, especially with my native plant highlights articles. And then plant identification, whether as a general topic or how to identify a specific species, is also a topic that you cover a lot, Anthony, on the Backyard Ecology YouTube channel. And I know you've got a lot more videos planned around that topic.
Yeah, I go into quite a bit of detail in some of the definitive guide videos that I've been doing lately. And those deal with one genus of plant. And I also plan on doing some more that go into some more depth on more of the botanical terms and what they mean and how to use them to identify plants.
And then we've both been talking about possibly offering some plant identification classes in the future. So I'll put links in the show notes to some of the resources that we've talked about or that we have available through Backyard Ecology, like the blogs, the YouTube channel, videos, and some of those things. Also, if any of our listeners have a favorite plant identification app or field guide or key, go to the webpage for this episode and leave a comment telling us what it is and why you like it. That way, everybody who follows Backyard Ecology can kind of learn from each other because, like I said, none of us know everything and we're always learning. But thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us.
Thanks. It was great to be here and look forward to it doing it again.
Yep, I'm sure we'll have you on again. And of course, you're always on the YouTube channel. So thanks again and have a great day.
You too.
Plant identification is an important skill because knowing what type of plant you're looking at is the key to knowing and understanding so much more about not only the plant, but also the area that you are in. Luckily, there are lots of different resources available to help you identify the plants you find. And the more you try to identify the plants around you, the better you will become at it. Hopefully, our conversation today helped give you some hints about some of the things to look at when trying to identify a plant and some of the resources you can use. If you enjoyed this episode, then I encourage you to check out some of our other Backyard Ecology content. You can find links to all of our blogs, podcasts, and YouTube videos at the Backyard Ecology website. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.